Hello, my name is Ed Chapman, and this video cast is going to cover part of Unit 1, Ecology, and we're going to focus on Part A of this unit, which is about the interactions within and among populations, and specifically, we're going to focus on the first part of this, which is defining the levels of organization found in biology, which starts very small and non-living and becomes very large and very complex and very much alive. Okay, one of the most important characteristics of life is that it's organized. This means that living things are assembled or put together or interact with each other in a definable way, in an organized way. It's not random. And life is organized at levels from very simple and non-living to very complex and very much alive. So this idea of levels is important. Here's a list of all the levels of organization, and we're going to start with the atomic level, which is the simplest. And we're going to end up with the biosphere, which is the most complex. And this approach is hierarchical, which means there is an increase in something as we move. And as we move through this system, or this list at least, we're going to be going from simple to complex. Okay, the atomic and molecular levels are not alive. They're non-living. Something really special happens when you go from the molecular level to the cellular level. That's where life appears, this characteristic that we call life, which is living matter. The cellular level is the first living level in the hierarchy, and what that means is it's achieved enough complexity to actually be able to have all the characteristics that make something alive. The tissue, organ, and organ system level are levels that only exist in multicellular organisms, which means you have to be bigger than one cell to have tissues, organs, and organ systems. The organism level can be multicellular, like humans, or unicellular, like a bacteria or an amoeba or a paramecium. So got to be careful with that level. The population and species levels are the levels at which things can go extinct. Local populations of animals can disappear, or an entire species can disappear. The community level is built from species interacting with each other, and these interactions have names, which we'll study a little bit later. The ecosystem contains both living and non-living components like sunlight, soil, stuff like that. And finally, the biosphere is pretty much all the places in the planet, on the planet Earth combined, where life exists. So that's how we're going to study these levels of organization. Now, what I want you guys to do in your notebook is to make a list of all these 12 levels mentioned in the presentation so far and place them in order from simplest to most complex to show the hierarchy. Pretty much did that for you, but just go ahead and write it down. Okay, let's take each level now and look at a picture so we can make a visual association. The atomic level is the simplest level of organization in matter that we're going to study in biology and chemistry. And you should all remember that atoms have a nucleus, which is the middle part where protons and neutrons exist. And outside of the nucleus is a cloud of electrons. And these electrons exist at certain energy levels out from the nucleus, depending on the size of the atom. The molecular level is what you get when you combine atoms. For example, this is a water molecule. A molecule you should all be familiar with, H2O. It's made up of 3 atoms. 1, 2, 3. 2 of these atoms are hydrogen atoms, and 1 of the atoms is an oxygen atom. And we capture that information in this formula right here. H2O means there are 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen, but we generally don't write the 1. We just assume it's always there. The cellular level of organization is the first level that has enough complexity to be alive. And here's just a picture of an animal cell. Lots of things going on here. We'll be studying that in much more detail later on in the class. The tissue level is what you get when you combine cells or similar cells to complete a more advanced function. For example, here we have some, let's see, this looks like brain tissue. All right, this is brain tissue. So all these squiggly black spider-looking things are brain cells or nerve cells or neurons. And they're all very similar. They're all close to each other, and they're all working together to do something that an individual brain cell or neuron could not do by itself. So that's a good example of a tissue. This looks like a picture down here of bone cells. This looks like a bone cell here. This looks like a bone cell here. Obviously, they're encased in stony material, which makes them strong and structurally sound, which allows bone tissue to do its job. A very different job from brain tissue. So bone tissue, brain tissue, two examples of tissues with very different cells, with different structures to do different functions. Bone, of course, supports multicellular bodies, and brain tissue stores, processes, and sends out information. Okay, the organ level is what you get when you combine tissues to do an even bigger function. And here we have a heart. A heart is an organ, and the heart is made up of muscle tissue, which is kind of this pinkish brown. It's made up of nervous tissue, which this diagram really doesn't show very well. And it's made up of fatty tissue, which is providing energy to the heart muscle, which is color-coded here in yellow. So tissues work together to build organs. Okay, we're going to move up to organ systems. This is a nice picture of a digestive system made up of lots of different organs. You probably already know about the stomach and the intestines, okay, two different sizes of intestines. You may not know, but you should know now that the liver is part of the digestive system along with the gallbladder. So all these work together to digest and process the food that we eat. A good example of an organ system made up of individual organs. Now, an organism is an independent unit, or a body, if you will, and this can be a little confusing sometimes. An organism can be something very large, like this elephant here, which is made up of trillions and trillions of cells working together as organ systems and organs, or you can be a single organism made up of a single cell, like this paramecium, which is a very common pond organism. They're really fast swimmers. You should get a chance to see these in some pond water at some point this year in school. But these are two examples of organisms, a multicellular organism like an elephant, or a unicellular organism like paramecium. Let me write that for you, just because we're going to be seeing this word all year. Paramecium, all right, is what we call these little single-celled pond organisms. Now, a population is what you get when you combine a bunch of interbreeding individuals. For example, this could be a population of orca or killer whales. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can see at least 6 orcas here in this population swimming together. A group of whales is called a pod, by the way, not a school. They're not fish. But this population moves, it interbreeds, it raises its young, it hunts together. So populations have lots of characteristics that you don't see with just one organism. Important thing to know. Now, the species level is when you combine all the populations together, okay? Now, these populations could be close together, or they could be spread out all over the planet. For example, we have a population of rats here in the United States. There are rats in China, and there are rats in Australia. Now, these rats don't get to interact with each other, so they're separate populations, but all together, they make up a species. Now, this population can go extinct, but there's still other populations, so the species is still around. But if all the populations of a species go extinct, we say that the species is now extinct. Some ideas to remember about the species level of organization in life. All right, here's an example of an exception to the species rule. This animal here you might not recognize, but it's a mule. And a mule is what you get when you cross a horse with a donkey. It's the offspring of a horse and a donkey. Now, mules are healthy, useful, happy animals, but they can't reproduce because they are sterile. There's something wrong with their reproductive system that happens because of that comes from the combining of the genetics of two different species, mules and horses and donkeys. So horses are species, donkeys are species. They can interbreed, but the product of that interbreeding is something called a mule, and the mule is not a species because it can't reproduce on its own. Mules can't mate with mules, and mules can't mate with horses or donkeys to make more animals. So they're kind of like an imperfect species. Talk more about that later. The community level of organization is what you get when you combine different species living together. And there are all sorts of relationships that you can get between species in a community. For example, different species can compete for food. All right, different species can live together and help each other or maybe harm each other slightly in different symbioses, which we'll talk about later. And you can have predator-prey relationships where species interact with each other for food, where there is a predator, which is doing the hunting, and a prey species, which is being hunted. Community-level interactions. Now, the ecosystem level is what you get when you combine communities and abiotic factors like sunlight, soil, temperature, climate, all these things. So an ecosystem could be like a desert. All right. Now, this desert has within it communities of plants and communities of animals, but the desert also has a climate. It has low rainfall. Okay. It's dry. It's sandy soil. Okay. Rainfall, the dryness, the composition of the soil, these are all abiotic factors, which means they're not alive. Also, it gets lots of light. It's a very bright environment. It's hot during the day and can be very chilly at night. It's a climate factor. All these things are abiotic. So if you look at different ecosystems like a rainforest, you have lots of rain here, lots of shade. Again, different abiotic factors making it a different ecosystem. And you can have aquatic ecosystems like this freshwater pond. I think you get the idea. You get ecosystems by combining communities and abiotic factors like climate, rainfall, soil, light, etc. And finally, the largest level of organization that we're going to touch on in biology is the biosphere level. And as far as we know, the Earth is the only biosphere in the universe that we've been able to locate so far. And the biosphere is made up of places in the air where you find living things, all the way down deep underground to where you find living things. It's the thickness of our planet where living things can live, from high in the atmosphere where you might find small flying insects, to very deep underground where you might find bacteria, for example, in caves. This whole range of ecosystems combined makes up the biosphere. So you get a biosphere by combining multiple ecosystems. All right, we're going to stop there, and that is the end of this first video cast.